Okay.
So, first of all, thank you and welcome here.
Oh, before.
Welcome everybody, and thank you for this talk.
Yeah.
I hope everybody will enjoy. Thank you again.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, good evening. I was asked to give kind of a public talk here also in Samlinga because there's a series of talks going on. And when I was asked on what topic I want to speak, I thought about this book project I was involved in. It's called Murals of Tibet. So it's about the Buddhist wall paintings in Tibet. So this was a project which all the credits go to Thomas Leard, or Tom Leard, who went many times to Tibet to take pictures of the remaining murals in the monasteries. As you probably know, with the Chinese invasion in Tibet, probably like almost all monasteries got destroyed. Normally, Tibet is a great climate for conserving old things, so they still had a lot of old monasteries with very old murals. But then, with the invasion of the Chinese, most of the monasteries got destroyed. So there's only very few remaining. Most of them due to the request of the Indian government at that time to save some of the buildings because they're related also to Indian history. Otherwise, probably even they would have been gone. And in this project, the Dalai Lama was involved to give it more value that these murals, which are documented in the book, remain longer. So the publisher, Taschen from Cologne, they made like almost 1,000 copies of this book, and each was signed by the Dalai Lama. So giving it more value, and with the value, giving it more possibility that it will be preserved, not only for one generation, but for many generations to come. Because the pictures won't survive like that in Tibet, most of them. But in the book, they can survive for a couple more centuries, you know, if things go well. So here the Dalai Lama is signing these books, and this person with the light blue shirt, that's Thomas Leard, the photographer. And I was one of the 3 Tibetologists who were kind of explaining and commenting the murals. So you see, there's 2 books. One is that size, 25 kilos, with 600-700 pages. I mean, it doesn't fit into a suitcase. And then there is this smaller book, which itself is a big book, which has all the explanations and additional pictures. So it was a tremendous project, and it comes with this fancy table. And if you have it if it's packed, only 40 of them fit into one container. So it's huge. And when they sold the book in the beginning, it was 10,000 euros. And now, since they kind of only few remained, they lifted the price to 50,000 euros, 15, yeah? So you better get your copy quick, otherwise they raise it again. I'm not earning any money with making this statement. So here just you see the size. I have this picture with me proudly in the middle of the books, and you see the size of the books. And here you see there are also some pages to even open up that you have, in the end, some pages have that size, you know, and that's really incredible. So here you have the picture of Thomas Leard as a young man sitting at the feet of Trulche Rinpoche, and he spent a long time in Nepal and then later also in Tibet, and he brought all the expertise to make all these pictures, and particularly the dedication, because it's not an easy place to make pictures in Tibet. So here you see, so let me see, it's a little strange reacting. Here you see a comparison. If you take a normal picture, it would look like that here. You know, you have a bright center and then the sides get dark. And it's not so clear. This is the technique Thomas Leard then used, that he used kind of he had track for the camera when the camera went then up and down, and he took one picture after the other, and in the end he was stitching it all together. And only with this kind of digital way of doing it, it was possible to document these murals in this very clear and unique way. So the way of taking this picture is an art in itself, because it's different than, you know, when I went there and took pictures, and at that time, you know, I came home and then I looked at my pictures. I said, oh, this one is too dark, you know, it's out of focus. It was before digital. And it's very difficult to take pictures in the monasteries because the lights are not good. It's not legal. You know, you need the support of the caretakers of the monastery. They do it if they see that you are really have appreciation for what you see, because they risk also something. So, I mean, these pictures now, they were taken in places where, you know, one could do it, like for example, in the Potala or in Sakya Monastery, you couldn't take pictures because there's too much security going on and you don't get permits. So here you see the scene kind of in Tibet. This is, I'm not so in control of that program right now. Here you see, here in this place you see an old mural in a monastery, and it's used for storage of straw. Yeah? That's the situation. Now it's better for some remaining murals, but often the monastery were used for something else. Even they just covered the murals with white color, you know, to get rid of them. And the way the book is arranged is that it covers 12 different places coming from the west to the east. You see that here you see kind of down here you see is Lhasa, and then there's Mount Kailash. So the way it's arranged is that you start here in the Yalung Valley with the Tratang Monastery, and then you go through Lhasa and through all these various places where there are some murals remained. So the first monastery we look on is Tratang, which was founded in the 11th century, and there are kind of the oldest murals remaining, which are from the 11th century. And when you look at the style, this is kind of a cosmopolitan style which developed in Tibet. When Buddhism came to Tibet in the 8th century, the neighboring countries were under pressure also from Muslim invasions. So a lot of artists or Buddhist artists and masters were coming to Tibet. So they had coming people from the Silk Route of Central Asia, like Khotan. They had people coming from Kashmir. They had artists coming from India, from Kathmandu. And so they had kind of a mix of all these different art styles, which then created its own expression in Tibet. So in the pictures, you sometimes can see, oh, this is more like a style reminding of Kashmir, or that is more like Indian Pala style or more Neva style from Nepal. And then over the time, it all came in together into a Tibetan style. The iconography in the Buddhist pictures is quite, how you say, regulated, like the dimensions of a Buddha follow a geometric pattern, how kind of the size of the head in comparison to the size of the body, they have a way of constructing an image. So that is quite unique, or quite, no, let's say that's quite general, but then the way you express all the other details, that varies. So then the next big monastery is Samye, which was the first Tibetan monastery built at the time of Padmasambhava and Shantarakshita in the 8th century. And this is kind of the rebuild of the main temple. And here is one image which depicts actually the monastery, and you see that the whole monastery is kind of fashioned in a mandala style because it kind of is oriented in the 4 directions. And in the center you have the main building, and around you have various stupas and other temples. And all is kind of enclosed, so that is kind of the physical appearance of a mandala. And here, that's another interesting mural from Samye. There is kind of a depiction how in the Abhidhamma tradition of Buddhism, the world is seen. This is kind of following also typical Indian way of seeing the world. Buddha was not so interested in kind of, showing how the world really is. He adopted these things from the tradition which were around at his time. The teaching of Buddha is about how you get out of the suffering, how you get out of the dissatisfaction you experience in your existence. That was his teaching about, but a lot of other things he was just taking the contemporary knowledge which was available in that time in India. So also this idea how the world looks like is mirroring the Indian ideas of the time of Buddha. So here in the center you have kind of the axis mundis, the world, the main central mountain, and around you have kind of then 7 rings of mountains, and around there are then 12 continents. And down here, this continent is our world. Jambudvipa, they call it in Sanskrit. And that's the southern side of the mountain. And on top of the mountain, there's a celestial palace with the gods and demigods. And all of that is then in the big ocean. Here you can see also the wagon with the moon and the sun, which is here pulled by horses. Also a traditional idea. So next is the Lukhang temple, which is in Lhasa, which is kind of regarded as the most holy place of Tibet. And here you see in the front the stone is polished by people doing their prostrations over the centuries. Here also the book can't show much pictures because you don't get a permit for taking pictures there. But on the top of the Lukhang there's a little temple, and he has 2 very old pictures or murals, which are also probably, we don't really know from when they are, but they're at least 1,000 years old. And here you see Vaishravana, and you see the 2 bodhisattvas on the left and right, and you see these images. They're quite how we say, worn off, which puts them at a big risk, because Tibetans in their temples, they like images which are clear, which are useful for their devotional practice. So if you have images like that, it means this is a temple which doesn't have much people coming there, otherwise they would have painted over it. I mean, if they paint over it, they do it very nicely, often the same images as before, but from our point of view of art history, we wouldn't do that. But for them, it's an object of use. So, and if you kind of repaint, then it's beautiful again, and people can recognize what's on the picture. And so, having these pictures in the book is also what keeps the knowledge alive that this art was like that in Tibet, because probably not too long they will be overpainted if they are not destroyed by other causes. For example, here in 2018 there was a fire on the Lukhang, and the kind of was quite a big cover-up by the Chinese that it was very difficult to really understand what was damaged. But it seems, when I looked it up, that the 4 little temples which were on the roof, or not little temples, but the 4 temples, none of them were the one with these images, but everything got destroyed. So that's what happens. These are wooden structures, they use candles. Well, that's always asking for trouble. So that is another monastery near Lhasa, which was founded in the 15th century, Drepung and Nechung. And here you have this very famous image, which is called the Wheel of Life or Wheel of Existence. Here you have kind of an essentialized representation of the Buddhist teaching. So here in the center, you see a pig, a bird, and a snake. They represent our 3 basic negative emotions. So the pig represents ignorance, not knowing who we really are, not knowing what is our real nature. Then the bird stays for passion, lust, desire, and the snake for aggression or anger. So by not knowing who we really are, we go in 2 kind of, we choose 2 ways. One way is there's a desire, there's some wanting, some identification with something. I'm like that, I want this, yeah? That's one way how we react. And the other way is we push away something. We say, that's not me. I don't want to do with that. I don't like it. So this liking and not liking is kind of these 2 attitudes which come out of the ignorance that we don't know who we really are. Because our real state is beyond liking or non-liking, beyond attachment and aversion. But not knowing who we really are, not being in this state of innate bliss or joy and presence, we go into these 2 activities of accepting and rejecting. Buddha said the cause for the continuity of suffering is our desire of wanting something. Wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. And this can be overcome by knowing who we really are. And our real nature is beyond the normal joy or suffering, but it is then kind of, we can say, happiness without any cause or reason. So that is represented here as these 3 essential forces. And around it is then a person who goes either up, like here, or goes down. So it means like if we follow negative attitudes about harming others and ourselves, we go down to suffering. If we, on the other side, have positive attitudes for benefiting others and really benefiting ourselves, we rise from suffering to happiness. And then here around we have kind of we have different segments, like this is the hell realm. Here we have one realm which is the hungry ghosts or pretas, one is the animal realm, one is the gods. Here the semi-gods, the titans and gods are in one realm together, and here are the human realms. So this is a traditional point of view of at the time of Buddha, that we live in 6 different dimensions or 5 different, and they are all within the circle of, how we say, conditioned existence. They're always connected with suffering. Just each realm has different suffering. Like in the hell realm, they have very heavy suffering. In the human realm, we have some suffering, we have some joy. There's kind of well spread. But in the god realms, they have much more joy. But in the end, also the existence of a god, which is thousands of years, also comes to an end, and then it goes down because the good karma is worn off. So it's a circle. It's always kind of going up and down. That's kind of the Buddhist perspective of the nature of our existence. One life comes to an end, the next comes, depending on what we did in this life, or then we have a next rebirth. If we have a positive attitude, not harming others, helping others, then we have good chances with good karma to go to a state with less suffering. If we have negative attitude towards others and ourselves, then we have chances, or not chances, but then it leads us down into more suffering. So this is an image which is used very much. We find that on every entrance of a monastery, because it kind of represents the Buddhist teaching in a very essential way. And only outside here on top, there is Buddha Shakyamuni, because he went beyond suffering. Here, this is the next monastery. Maybe some of you who've been to Tibet, when you come from the airport and you drive to Lhasa, you pass by this Gongka Chöde monastery. I went there myself in the mid-90s, but I couldn't get in and have a look on the murals. I mean, there was one room I could enter, but that was not the room with the old murals, because there was no access for tourists. And here we have a particular image. You see here, this is what it's called, the room for the guardians of the Buddhist teaching. So in Buddhism, there's the idea that there are particular Buddhas, enlightened beings, who protect the teaching, who protect beings, protect them against negative forces, and they have their own temple where rituals are performed for them. So here we see various of these restful beings. It's quite a heavy iconography, but it all has symbolic meaning. So here, have a look. First, we have the image like that, that's kind of a normal photography, yeah? And then with this digital technique, then, how the colors, how bright the colors are, how clear the colors are, yeah? These fires, they are kind of the aura of this powerful guardian deities. And then behind it, we have the famous scene of the graveyards. There's 8 graveyards, because also in the India of time of Buddha, also today, you have the idea of the various castes, and Like in our countries, Catholic and Protestant, they can't be in the same graveyard. So in India, they have many castes, so they need even more graveyards. Yeah? And here you have kind of nice, or not nice, but interesting scene. You have various beings. For example, here you have kind of a Naga, which is a particular being which is connected to the water and the underground. And here they have here like snakes. They're seen like snake beings. They're not physical beings. They're kind of. And here you have a flying being, and he carries the corpse of a dead person. And I think that's particularly interesting for our Western culture, because here stork. In our culture, normally a stork brings a baby, but here this stork brings the corpse of a baby. And these charnel grounds, they were always also the place for yogis to practice, because there the impermanence of our life was so evident, because normally we always live with the idea our life continues. We kind of avoid the knowledge that, death will come. And in Buddhism, it's very important to be aware that one day you die, to make good use of this life. In particular, the moment of death is a very precious moment. One can make very good use to attain liberation from cyclic existence, to get free of suffering. So therefore, death is a very important topic in Buddhism, and it's not seen as something so negative. The idea is, when there's birth, there's death. When something gets collected, then one day it will spread. If there's a beginning, there's an end. That's just the nature of reality. So birth means there's death one day. And so the being aware of death gives us presence and awareness, and to understand that we have a precious moment now that we are alive. So here you see also the way here the corpses are, and so on. So that's here that's the kind of Tibetan style of getting rid of corpses. In Tibet, the ground was very dry and hard or frozen, so it was not easy just to bury a corpse. And also they didn't have so much forest in many parts of Tibet to burn them. So what they did is they were offering the corpses to the vultures and to the wolves and to the wild animals. And this was done by the yogis, who would kind of then take care of the corpses and feed them to the animals. So that's still happening nowadays in Tibet in some parts. And they call it the sky burial, because the vultures, which are regarded in Tibet, they have quite some estimation for vultures, because they say on one side vultures are like predators, they eat meat, but on the other side vultures, they don't want to kill. They wait until their victims die by themselves. So they think, oh, that's quite a good attitude, for an animal which is relying on meat, not to kill, but to wait until the victims die by themselves. So therefore, the vultures have quite a good reputation in Tibet. And here you see how the vultures eat up the corpses. So this is now more in central Tibet. That's when you drive up from, for example, from Kathmandu to Lhasa, you come by Gyantse Kumbum. It's not so far from Shigatse, which was the second biggest town in central Tibet after Lhasa. And there in the 15th century, they built here this particular big monastic complex. And this was quite special, because here different Buddhist schools, they shared the same space. So the monasteries were belonging to different traditions, but they were in the same sacred area. And here, this particular building, which is called stupa, which has many rooms, and each room is decorated with fantastic murals. And altogether, it says that in this place there were more than 28,000 images of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and whatever. So it was really a treasure of art, and luckily parts of it survived. I mean, it was kind of all covered with houses, but at least these 3 temples, they survived. And here you see one of these chambers in the stupa. Here you see the images at the wall, and you can see it's not easy to take pictures there because, the light is unclear, and, you don't have space to put up everything. So this is one of the images, and this is Manjuvajra Guya Samaja, a tantric deity with many arms in union with the consort, representing the principle of the male principle here is skillful means, which means, that you know methods to apply in a particular way to overcome ignorance, and the female aspect is wisdom. So it's in this union, this male and female Buddha, they represent this union of skillful means and wisdom, a very common tantric symbolism. Often you find the deities in this Yap-Yum union, as it's called. And this here is, so that is also another, here you see again these 3 structures, the stupa and the 2 other monasteries, which were founded there in the 14th, 15th century. And here, this is an interesting picture. In the center, you have Kublai Khan, this Mongolian leader, and on the right, you have Chögyal Pakpa, which was at that time the ruler of Tibet, a Sakya master, and he was also then the teacher of Kublai Khan, and therefore you see they sit on the same level, which is normally the emperor sits higher than everybody else, but here he sits on the same level as his teacher, as his guru. Here, this is some old image taken, from I think it was an Italian expedition, and here you see how it looked in the past. There were much more structures, and how this stupa looked at that time. So these 2 pictures you've seen also in the beginning because they were used as the covers for these 2 books. So on the left you have the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, and on the right you have the Green Tara. Both Buddhas, Avalokiteshvara representing the compassion of all the Buddhas, and Tara is a green Tara, which means it's particular a Buddha which is helping in a very quick way whenever there is need. It's kind of also the caring female aspect, but both represent also the compassion. I mean, every Buddha has, in the Buddhist point of view, each Buddha has compassion and wisdom, but then they kind of specialized on certain areas. Here, this is, you see some kind of cuts, and you see the details. And here, particular beautiful, the flowers, the ornaments, the bird. And on the right side, you see Vajrapani, this Buddha representing the power and strength of the enlightened mind, holding a vajra and kapala. And this is this is kind of the restful aspect of the Buddha Amoghasiddha. This is Vajra Yaksha. And this is the idea behind the restful Buddha, is that there is not always just love and compassion can teach beings and solve problems. So restful Buddhas, by their power, can train people and help to resolve situation which needs more force. That's one aspect why you have also restful Buddhas. And the other is the movement. You see there are flames behind it. And often these are imagined as dancing and vivid and alive, represents the movement aspect of our mind, because our mind is not in a state of calmness, not in a state of kind of deep equipoise, state of emptiness, but it's full of movement. We have thoughts, we have sensual perception, we have emotions, so that is associated with movement. That's why also these restful Buddhas represent also the state of our mind in its active way. So now we are in Shalu, that's also close to Gyantse. Here you see there's some renovation happening. Unfortunately, the Chinese authorities were not eager to cooperate with Western renovation projects. There were some going on, but on a little scale, and so even the things which remained, a lot of them also got lost because they were not so skilled, the Tibetans, by renovation. I mean, in the past, yes, but after Buddhism was kind of forbidden and banned, also the arts which were involved with building monasteries, with painting the walls, with all these crafts, there was no more demand. These people, this knowledge got lost, because there were decades when it was all kind of stopped, no building of new monasteries, etc. So that's inside a famous representation of the 5 Buddhas, called the 5 Tathagatas or the 5 Jnani Buddhas, and representing the idea of the Buddhist mandala, like the white Buddha here in the center would be in the center of the mandala, and then the other 4 Buddhas would be in the 4 directions. So that is a very principle ordering system in the tantric Buddhist imagery. And in the front you see a woman putting butter into this huge butter lamp. Butter is kind of the essence of what the nomads kind of accumulate from their farming or from their herding activities. So, when they churn the milk, they have butter, and a lot of the butter which they produce actually then goes into butter lamps, which they offer. Imagine that one of your most nourishing food you would offer, with your prayers for higher goods. And that is what's happening in Tibet a lot. They have these butter lamps, also not so, supportive for murals, because they burn and then the smoke collects on the walls. But it's a very deep expression of the devotion of the Tibetan people, that they offer a lot of the butter they produce on the holy places. And here in the Shalu monastery, around, there's kind of you can walk around the whole monastery, and in the gangways you have murals all around, and there are depictions of previous life stories of the Buddha. They are called Jataka. And these are stories where it says, once when Buddha was an elephant, or once when Buddha was this and this person. And it's interesting because these Jatakas these stories, they made it also to Europe. Like when you look on the motifs in the fairy tales of the Brother Grimm, I don't know how you call that, in the German Grimm brothers we had, they were collecting fairy tales in the 19th century, and you find some of the motifs in these, what we call our German fairy tales. Actually, they come from India, because by the Arabs, they came like in the maybe medieval time, through the Arabs they came to Europe, and the Arabs got them from the Indians. And it's interesting when you read these Jatakas of Buddha, suddenly you find some of the topics, some of the stories which are similar to what we consider our traditional German fairy tales. So there was always exchange going on. Yeah? It was not that like India was completely separated from Europe. For example, there were Buddhist monasteries in Alexandria at the time of the Greeks. Alexander the Great came to India 333 before Christ. The Greeks came to India. So, they imported a lot of the knowledge from India, and also the Indians got Western knowledge. So there was always a cultural exchange, and there didn't happen so much research on that. Also, the imagery of Buddha is actually coming from the Greek culture. After Buddha died, there was no tradition to depict Buddha as a being, just symbolizing, maybe there were the kind of the foot and handprints, there was a Bodhi tree representing Buddha or a flame on the throne, but there was no image of Buddha in a human form. And later on, a couple centuries later, Buddha was depicted, and they choose the model of from the Greek culture, like Apollo. So actually the image of Buddha was based on Western symbolism. So this is kind of how exchange happened. Here you have some scenes, and actually these stories were then, they are based on the writings of the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje, who was also a great Dzogchen master in the 14th century, and he kind of wrote these Jataka stories in a version then to decorate the monastery, or they were then used to decorate the monastery. So here it's the famous story of a female dancer. Here you have a story of the lion. And they were actually painted by a famous Nepali painter called Aniko. And Aniko, who lived in the 13th century, he came to Tibet, and from Tibet then he came to China. So his style of painting, which is the Nepali style, or they call it Nevari style, then came to Tibet. I mean, he wasn't the first Nepali coming to Tibet, since Nepal is a bordering country to Tibet. But then also he came to China. And in China, his style of Aniko became also quite famous. So this was an artist, inspiring Chinese, Tibetans, and traveling on the Silk Road. And so he was kind of an international artist at his time. Here the scene of Buddha Shakyamuni with the gesture mudra of teaching in front below the Bodhi tree, which is, the scene of his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. And around there are then the students of Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. Here you see a detail, you see the leaves and flowers of the Bodhi tree. And when a Buddha is depicted, it always has kind of the 32 marks of an enlightened being. So these are kind of the long ears. This is kind of the, on the place of the third eye. You have this Ushnisha on the top of the head. And so there are 32 marks which represent him as a fully enlightened being. Now we come to Sakya. And Sakya was the place of power in the medieval time, because I showed you before the picture of Kublai Khan sitting together with this great Sakya master, and so this was kind of the center of power, and partly destroyed. So here you see just some remains, but there's also I have here an old picture, and here you see this fortress-like building, which still remains today. It's a huge building, it's incredible. And there is also still a big library with many books and old books, because in Tibet books survive. If the worms don't eat it, books stay over centuries. It's so dry. In India, they had to copy books again and again because they have monsoon. And monsoon just destroys books because they were written on palm leaves. So with the moisture in India, that books were kind of handed down the next generation. They needed to be copied again and again. Otherwise, they were lost. But in Tibet, you put a book into the shelf, it remains. That the worms don't eat it, they put in arsene, which is kind of a poison, yeah? But it prevents the worms from eating the books. And so in Sakya, we still have a huge library which people are eager to study and find out about. So also here from Sakya, we don't have just a few pictures because it's a place which is also under strict control. Now we come to a place, Chonang Phuntsholing, and it was founded by the famous master Taranatha in the 17th century. He was a very illustrious person. He traveled also to India, and he kind of started a new tradition because he had a new point of view on how to understand the teachings of his forefathers. So he was also a great artist. And here you see, this is the Bodhisattva Surya Prabha, which has here the sun on the lotus. So he holds the lotus and above is the sun. So it's kind of, we can understand that as a Buddhist incorporation of the sun god from the Hindu tradition. Here that's one of the 5 Tathagata Buddhas called Ratna Sambhava. This is Amoghasiddha. So this is very, the colors, like the very powerful colors. In Tibet, for the painting, they use minerals. For example, the blue is often lapis lazuli, or the green could be I don't now remember, malachit, or so sometimes they use also very precious minerals for making the wall paintings, but also for the tanka paintings, but also these colors last long because it's mineral colors. Here you have kind of a whole scene, and you have Buddha Shakyamuni sitting here on the lotus. No, this is Vairochana. Vairochana is, in the mandala symbolism, he's the central Buddha. He has the mudra of teaching, of white color, and around you have various bodhisattvas. A bodhisattva is a being who's on the path to enlightenment, but also kind of postpones his complete enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. That he can still act in the world, that he doesn't go into nirvana, but that out of compassion he can serve for the benefit of beings. And here you have various bodhisattvas, like here's Maitreya. For example, the way you tell this is Maitreya, he has a flask. This is the symbol for Maitreya. Here you see a meditation belt in use, and this is a yellow Manjushri. Here he has the sword of wisdom, so by that we can tell it's Manjushri. And here, this lady playing this sitar or zither, this instrument, that's Saraswati. She's always in connection for science, music, poetry. That's kind of the domain of Saraswati, this female bodhisattva. And here we have again Surya Prabha, the one with the sun. This again is Amuga Siddha in green color, and left and right two bodhisattvas. And look at these contrast colors, like you have the orange and the blue, you know, this is really very bright and strong. It's kind of a unique style we found here in this Jonang monastery, Phuntsholing. Now we come to the very west of Tibet. This is called Toling and Tsaparang. When the Tibetan Empire collapsed in the 9th century, then one of from the king's family, he went to western Tibet, where now is like close to Ladakh. Now nobody is living there anymore, because I think in the 15th century, the region became so dry that it was impossible to live there. There are just a few yogis left, but otherwise it's just so dry that nobody can live there anymore. It's not so far from Mount Kailash. So it's kind of north of Nepal, not so far from the border to Ladakh, bordering Kashmir, yeah? Here we have this very beautiful image of a medicine Buddha. From Google, which is the name of the area. Here, the bigger image of the medicine Buddha, and to the left we have scenes of the life of Buddha. And you see they're all kind of having these different styles of art, because the artists came from different regions, and so even the kind of the symbolism is the same, but the expression, how the details are made, varies. And you have to imagine the art here is a mean for communicating the Buddhist teaching. At that time when these pictures were made, most of the people were illiterate. It was very few people who could read and write, or very few who had access to education, which was, going to a monastery. So with the art, the teachings could be communicated to the people. And at that time, there was no, people didn't have pictures, they had no TV, probably even they didn't have pictures at home at the walls, yeah? But here, when they went to the monastery, they had these very bright and incredibly done images. And with these images, the monks or lamas could explain the meaning of the teaching. So they were a very important mean of communicating the essence of Buddhism. So showing kind of a Buddha and explaining to people, well, that's a human being who kind of accomplished its whole potential. Now he's in a state of compassion and wisdom. And having then this image for, showing how that kind of would look like, was important mean for communication, and telling the stories which are behind all these images. So there's a long oral tradition, And the art was kind of one of the main means for communicating the teachings to the normal people. These are two offering goddesses, female bodhisattvas, and here it's quite a particular style, their proportions, and so there's Pushpa and Padya. You know, sometimes in the mantra you will say Pushpa, Padya. So then these are the offerings of food and, for example, Pushpa is flowers. Here you see the plate with flowers. And here this lady holds a conch shell with water. And this water was particular for washing the feet of a guest. So the idea is when a guest comes, you give him water for washing his feet, and then they get also water for drinking. So they have kind of two different kind of waters for offering. And this is a particular wall which has, here we have there's kind of, in the Indian tradition, you have the 10 powerful gods, like you have Vishnu, you have Brahma, you have Shiva, but you also have Agni, the god of fire, and Kinara, the god which is of horses. For example, here you see the horse head surrounded by others with horse head. And here you have the fire god riding on the goat, around him all these yogis. And here you have some warriors, and here you have Garuda. Garuda is like a griffin in our tradition. You know, it's a mythical animal which is kind of a mix of bird, and often it has a kind of a sometimes it has a lion head, and or kind of a mix of various animals, and sometimes also so now this is an image of Queen Maya. Queen Maya is the mother of Buddha Shakyamuni, and this is the scene of the birth of Buddha. Here Buddha comes out of the side of the Queen Maya. Here down there sits the god Indra with many eyes all over his body, and this is traditionally seen how the birth of Buddha is imagined. The mother was on the way home to her parents for giving birth. That was traditionally the way you would go to your parents as a woman to give birth. But Buddha was born before she actually reached home. So she was just in a forest when she gave birth to Buddha. And since Buddha is a special being, Buddha was born out of the side of his mother. Somebody called it a spiritual cesarean, but I don't think it was a cesarean. Just okay. So this was now the first part of the talk, which was about the various monasteries, and I left out one of the monasteries, which is called the Lukhang. This is particular the monastery I worked on. These images were all worked on by Heather Stoddard. She is an English Tibetologist, and she described all these pictures. So, you know, I didn't work particularly on these pictures, but I worked on what's called the Lukhang, and so there I have more expertise for the pictures, because, you know, I wrote the comments in the book for this particular temple. Also, the first picture you see here, that is one of the images of the Lukhang. And Lukhang means Naga temple. Naga is this kind of group of spirits which are connected with rain and water. So in Tibet, rain is very important. It's a very dry area, central Tibet. I mean, East Tibet or South Tibet, you can have plenty of rain. But central Tibet is an arid, desert-like. So there, it's very important that you have enough and timely rain. So that is the responsibility of the Nagas. Yeah, here the Lukhang. And so when the Potala temple was enlarged by the time of the 5th Dalai Lama, they digged out the ground to take the earth for the mortal for building the Potala. And when the 5th Dalai Lama sat in meditation, he had a vision of the Naga king who told him, hey, listen, you are disturbing us. By digging into the ground, you disturb us, you know. He said, oh, sorry for making up with that provocation or for making up with that disturbance. I'm going to build a temple where you get everyday offerings. So that is the story how the Lukhang started. Therefore, also Lu for the Nagas and Khang means a building. So here you see that the red one is the Potala, and behind they created this lake by digging out for building the Potala. And here the Lukhang is a little island. Now they have a bridge since the 1980s, but before they took boats to get over there. And here is the 5th Dalai Lama in the 17th century. He was kind of a very important Dalai Lama, and he was also a Dzogchen master, and his rebirth was then the 6th Dalai Lama, Dzogchen Gyatso, which didn't live very long. He died was 29 or was killed with 29 because he was not really fitting the ideas of, at that time, there was a Mongol tribe, Dzunga, who were in power in Tibet, and they didn't like that the 6th Dalai Lama didn't want to be a monk. And so the story goes that he was killed for that and replaced with another one. And here it's important that the idea for the Lukhang came from the 5th Dalai Lama, but probably it was built at the time of the 6th Dalai Lama. But we didn't find any documents which kind of stated actually when the building was done. So either it was 1700 or it was 1791 that this temple was built. Here you see some images of Nagas, how they kind of depicted in art, the snake-like lower body, the human top body, and then some snakes on the head. Here's another one. Here you see also in the Lukhang a depiction of the Nagas. Here swimming in a pool, here with the snakes on the head. And also Nagas are powerful beings. Also in the world of the Nagas are Buddhist teachings. So there is a story that the famous book, the Prajna Paramita, was coming from the Nagas to the humans. So here you see kind of the situation of the Lukhang. Here in front of or at the back of the Potala, here you see how they used to take boats to get over there, typical Tibetan boats made out of wooden branches covered with skin, leather boats. And here you see the situation in probably in the 90s, coming more and more modern Chinese buildings. Probably now you have here some more skyscrapers, as they love it in China. And you know, that's how the sea looks today. It's part of a kind of an amusement park. So it's not under UNESCO protection like the Potala, because the Lukhang is in the park, and the park is with the forestry ministry. So there you can rent these beautiful boats. Here you see the island. Now here it's covered with trees. There are these willow trees. Sometimes they cut them back. And here this new bridge. So that is a model they have in the Ling in London of the Dzogchen community. You see there are kind of 3 floors, typical structure, representing also the 3 levels of the 3-dimension Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. And it's all on an island. So now there are kind of 3 floors, and in the base floor, most of the walls are painted white by now. Murals below the white color, but there's no restoration happening so far. But there's one room where the murals remained, and this room is dedicated to the famous teachings of the Kala Chakra or Wheel of Time. So in the center you see Buddha Shakyamuni, and on the right you see the king Suchandra, and the story goes that Suchandra was asking Buddha Shakyamuni, you have a teaching for a layman, I'm a king, I can't become a monk, I have to take care of a country. So then Buddha gave him the teaching of Kala Chakra, where he also could practice and attain enlightenment as a layperson. This is a famous mandala of Kala Chakra here. And here, down here, you see a little detail which we're going to look at next. Or not next, but coming. These pictures are probably from the 19th century. So there could be something else below, but from the style and the history, they fit into the 19th century. Here you have Kala Chakra, here the mandala of Kala Chakra. And here you can see the idea of a mandala. Sometimes it represents a building. Here you see kind of the walls, 4 gates. Here it's kind of even 4 walls. So, and in the center. And it's like you're looking from top down, but the perspective is kind of, they didn't have this, they use another way of creating or not having this perspective like we have developed it in the Renaissance. Like here you see the gates, the top of the gates, like looking on it, but it's painted like this. So, but the whole thing in the mandala represents the kind of it's called in Tibetan, the center and the circumference. So you have an image which represents the totality, and all is contained in a mandala, and mandala is a sacred space. So this is the detail to the left bottom. Here you have how the Tibetans imagine a ship going across the ocean. It's kind of a little bigger than their leather boats, made out of wood. And here you have a yogi, and this yogi is the Indian who brought the Kala Chakra teachings from Shambhala to India. Kala Chakra Bhaja is his name. Here you see the boat, and they have some, is it horses or donkeys? Probably could be here even a bull. So various animals are traveling on the boat, and in the ocean you have fishes, you have nagas, and here you have 2 elephants. I like them particular. When you see how they kind of, one is pushing the tree. You see the artist has not seen an elephant, otherwise the feet would look a little different. But it's like our medieval art, when you go to a medieval church and there you have lions and elephants from artists who never seen these animals, then it's also always interesting how they in their fantasies, all these beings. So with the Kala Chakra, there's always the 25 kings, Kulika, and here each king is together with his wife and then with a kid, because the king was asking Buddha for a teaching, which he can practice as a layman. And it's always very nice how the kids are depicted. Here, for example, you see the mother feeding the baby. And here it's always the king and the queen and the prince then. And here that's a little not so happy baby here. Looking a little skeptical. So this is kind of what we find on the ground floor. In the middle floor, there's kind of 9 panels with paintings which depict 2 Tibetan, they call it operas, because these are stories which are also shown as by their kind of dance and sing companies moving around in Tibet, and they show these plays with singing, speaking, dancing. So they call it Tibetan opera, Achelamo. And in these, there are always kind of common stories. And 2 of these very famous stories are depicted in the Lukhang. One is called Pema Omba, which is depicting a previous life of Padmasambhava, the great hero who brought the Buddhist tantric teachings to Tibet. And the other one is called Droma Sangmo, which is a story of a Dakini, of a female lady. And these stories are always kind of the fight of good against evil, and that in the end, the bad guys are caught by their negative karma and the good prevails. So in the end, the compassion wins. And here you have kind of, I counted them, maybe 200 scenes, they also numbered, and to each picture you have kind of little text, and it tells a story. So it's kind of like a comic book. So you can go there and read by number, follow the story and read one for one. Here, this story is particular nice. This is, in the end, how the bad king and his ministers, they receive, how you say, the result for their evil deeds, because they try to kill always and they kill people. So in the end, they are invited on a joyride here in this flying saucer, or actually it's painted like a pan. In Tibet, there are very big pans in the monastery where they roast the barley for like tsampa, or where they prepare the food for hundreds of monks. So this here is a big pan, and it's used as transportation. And here is the Dakini, and she uses a drumstick, and by that she navigates this flying saucer. Yeah? In here sits the kings and his mean ministers, and she says, "Oh, you want to go around? I show you nice places." And she takes them to the land of the Rakshasas, which are kind of, man-eating beings, man-eaters. And here the idea of this aircraft is, the name for pan and drum is homonym in Tibetan. It's called nga. And nga can be a drum, but it can be also a pan. And in the shamanic tradition, the shaman is riding on his drum, to the other world or wherever. So by using the drum, the shaman can travel through time and space. So that is also in that story, yeah. They get into the drum, and the Dakini is taking them to another place. Personally, I didn't recognize that, but there was a German or Swiss anthropologist who wrote 2 volumes about drums. And he actually pointed on that image, and there I understood, because when I saw it, I didn't realize. And here he's going to the world of the Rakshas, And here you see how they landed there with the drum and the mean Rakshasas. They kind of start eating these bad ministers and this king. It's one part of the story of this Dakini Droma Sangmo. So this is the story of Pema Omba, which is the story of a merchant who goes to a faraway island to collect jewels and to bring them back. But he's then kind of, in the end, he's killed by the bad king. And the son finds out, about what happened to his father, but he also wants to go there. And again, the king tries to kill him. And in the end, the son isn't killed, but the king is killed. And it's said that this was kind of previous life of Padmasambhava. So it's a famous story, which is then shown by these Tibetan opera groups. So that was the middle floor, and now we come to the top floor. This picture here is kind of a 360-degree picture. You see here the window, and you see here the window. So, you put it together, and then you're in this room, which is more or less like 40 square meters, let's say 6 by 6 or 6 by 7 meters. And here you have these, on 3 walls, you have the murals. One wall is just windows, and this used to be the sleeping room of the Dalai Lamas. So this was not a public place. The whole Lukhang was not a public place. Now you can go there, it's in the park, and not many tourists are coming because they're not so aware of it. Even now there's more awareness of it. But even if you want to go to this top floor, which has these unique murals, it's not always open. You have to ask the monks, and then there is kind of a ladder they let down, and then you can go up this kind of little wooden staircase. And I got aware of this Lukhang due to the pictures Rinpoche took in the early 80s, and which were published in this book, The Crystal and the Way of Light. This was kind of not the first book on Dzogchen by Rinpoche, but one of the first one. And in the book, there were these images from these murals. And when I saw that, I thought, wow, that's really interesting. Oh, I would like to know more about it. So I visited the temple in Lhasa, and I went into the room, and they didn't let me take pictures, so I just wrote down the inscription which I can find on the wall. Then they said, "Oh, you are not allowed to take to write down the inscriptions because they're always afraid that they have trouble with the Chinese. The monks otherwise wouldn't care, but they're afraid that they get heavy feedback." And so then I started speaking reading the inscription and kind of, letter by letter into a Walkman. And then at night in the hotel, I was writing it down, and I was going there 2-3 days, and then the monks in the end said, "Okay, you can write it down." And so then the next days I write down all the inscriptions, and when I was done, they handed me out a paper where somebody did all that before. But luckily, I did my work by myself because the person who wrote down the inscription was probably sitting somewhere, and the other person was reading it from the wall, and what was written on the wall and what was written down on the paper were often very different, because in Tibet many letters in a word are not pronounced, so there are different ways of spelling, and if you don't read it with your own eyes and just from hearing, then it doesn't always correspond. So I wrote it down myself. And here on the left, you see Chogyal Namkha Norbu in 1998. And this book was published, I think, in 88 or 89, I think, 87, 86 even. And we did last year an exhibition with the pictures Rinpoche took in Achitoso at the museum. So in the Lukhang, you have kind of various scenes, and this is the biggest wall, the northern wall. And I tried to kind of track down from where these images come, what is the literary source of it? Because you see the images, sometimes you see inscriptions, but to really understand the whole picture, you need the text which they're based on. And so I started just looking to various Tibetan texts, which I thought could be the source, what other people said before. A lot of people said, oh, this is the 5th Dalai Lama teaching. So I looked into the collected work of the 5th Dalai Lama, which I could find in the Bavarian Library in Munich. They have many Tibetan books. So I got the collected works of the 5th Dalai Lama, and I looked through it if I can find something corresponding to it, but I couldn't. And then somebody said, oh, this is that master or this master, but I couldn't find anything. But then in the end, I had a book from Lhasa, which was kind of a catalog of the Nyingma texts. Nyingma is one of the earliest Tibetan Buddhist school in Tibet. And there was a catalog of all the Nyingma texts collected in the Potala. And I thought, okay, now I look in that book because this is next to the Potala, so the text should be in this book. And then actually after 6 weeks of searching through Tibetan texts, I could find that this is based on the teachings of Pema Lingpa. Here, that is Pema Lingpa living from 50 to 5021. And he was born in Bhutan. And here, this on the left is an image. In the Lukhang, there's one wall where you have kind of the hagiography or the life stories of important Tibetan masters, like you find Milarepa, you find Sankhya Pandita, Tangtong Gyalpo, but also Padmasambhava, Tsongkhapa, Longchenpa, all the big names of Tibetan masters. And there's also Pema Lingpa. And here you see Pema Lingpa going into the water with an offering and a candle. He goes into this water, and then he comes out, candle still burning, but he has now a box with books, Terma, the hidden teachings. So, after seeing all these different masters and then looking through their catalog of what books they've written, I could identify it's based on the teaching of Pema Lingpa. And actually, the water depicted here, the river, is that river which is still now in Bhutan. And Tibetans or Bhutanese, they don't know how to swim normally. So going into the water is, very challenging. It's kind of, suicidal. And he jumped into the water, and the history goes he actually jumped into that river, which flows quite quick. Here, enlargement of the scene. Going into the water. Here, typical Bhutanese by the head they wear. And the reason why, I think why the depicted images come from Pema Lingpa is because the 6th Dalai Lama is in the family lineage of Pema Lingpa. So it's his family lineage, and therefore they are used in the Lukhang. Here, when I was analyzing the wall, I could find that there are kind of different parts are associated with different texts. And I could kind of find then the text at the wall, they were often condensing, like you had like 2 Tibetan lines, and then you had that condensed into a few words, and by that you could actually follow the depiction. You would know, oh, that is first, then that, because here there were no numbers with the words, like on the 2nd floor you had this stories, and there was always a number, so you could follow the stories by just following the numbers, but here there were no numbers. And here I could then identify various texts, which are all kind of explaining the Dzogchen teachings, the teachings of the total completeness or great perfection. I don't read you the name of the text because that is kind of not so important now. And often it's an incredible artwork. I mean, the publisher Taschen, they always compare that. It's kind of like this Sixtinian, or how you call it in Rome? Sistine. Yeah, they say it's the Tibetan equivalent of the Sistine Chapel of Rome, but it's definitely unique in the style and the contents, yeah? Because you have kind of all the Dzogchen teachings in images. Yeah, yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah. Here, for example, you have the central symbols which are used in the Dzogchen teachings. Here you have a mirror, and the mirror, our nature of mind is compared to a mirror, because our mind has the ability to kind of represent whatever's in front of it, you know, whatever's around us. A mirror reflects everything, but the mirror stays unstained by whatever reflection there is. May it be good or bad, nice or ugly, it doesn't change the nature of the mirror. And the nature of the mirror is recognized by its ability to reflect, but itself you cannot see the mirror. So that's kind of an image which is used in the Dzogchen teachings as a metaphor for the nature of our mind, which is like a mirror, unstained by whatever appears and the ability to reflect whatever there is. Or here you have a crystal, and but I could not locate these images which don't have a particular sentence explaining why they choose to have a conch shell here, or a snake, or here this bird. Here this detail shows the four rivers of samsara which you find. It's kind of the river of suffering, the river of impermanence, etc. And here the corpses are kind of taken away by the draft of the river. And here you always have these light spheres, tiglas, and in the tiglas there are always here two Buddhas. One is this blue and nude one, Samantabhadra, and the other one is the white Vajrasattva, because the depictions are based on the Dzogchen scriptures, which are called Dzogchen Tantras. And in these Tantras, there's always this dialogue that Vajrasattva, here looking up to Samantabhadra, asks a question. For example, how come that we're all enlightened since beginningless time, but still we are in a state of confusion? And then Samantabhadra answers. That's how kind of the narrative is transported in these Dzogchen Tantras. It's always a question and an answer. And this is kind of, we can see that as a continuity of the teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni. He also answered always to questions. Somebody was asking a question and then Buddha was replying. And that's how the sutras are structured, question and answer, and same you find in the Dzogchen Tantras. So you see over the wall spread these light spheres with these two Buddhas, and actually then they correspond to chapters. You know, here you see, here you see, here, here. So here we have also what's called the 100 peaceful and restful deities. These Buddhas, I mentioned before the word Tathagatas, or 5 Buddhas, here like Vairochana, Amoghasiddha, Ratnasambhava, Amitabha. They represent our 5 psycho-physical aggregates, you know, like the central Buddha represents our consciousness. this one represents our form appearance, physical appearance. The red one represents our perception. The yellow one is form, sorry. And the green one represents our kind of habits, our way of thinking, our kind of mental attitudes, samskara in Sanskrit. And the blue one sometimes represents consciousness, and the white one sometimes feeling. I say sometimes because blue and white sometimes exchange in the mandalas. But so you have these 5 aggregates, in Sanskrit skandhas, and they are represented by Buddhas. In the teaching of Buddha Shakyamuni of the sutra, these 5 skandhas or aggregates were considered negative. But in the tantric teaching, which is a path of transformation, they recognize that you can transform these 5 aspects of your being, and that in their very essence, they are pure. They are of enlightened nature, and therefore then they are depicted as Buddhas. In the sutra teaching, you said, complete enlightenment is that these 5 are kind of cancelled, that you go beyond. When Buddha died, he had parinirvana, which means the 5 aggregates or skandhas he left behind. This was then complete liberation, because his body was still connected with, or his existence with, these 5 aggregates. But in the tantric teaching, they recognize that you can transform that maybe if you're ignorant, they appear to be impure, but you can transform the impure into the pure. And then these 5 aggregates, they become then the 5 wisdoms. And they are always in union, yap and yum, and the female, they represent the 5 elements. So red is the fire element, Pandara Vasini, or here blue is then Mamaki, sometimes Lochana, sometimes Mamaki. Yellow is then often Lochana, green is Tara, and white is Tatvishvari. So they represent space, air, fire, water, earth. And normally we consider them as impure, but in the tantric teaching they understand that the energy, the essence of the element is pure from the beginning. So all these deities, they represent nothing else than our enlightened potential. Like here we have 8 bodhisattvas, male and female, and they represent our 5 senses. Our ability to see, the object of seeing, the consciousness of seeing. And so all these 100 peaceful and restful Buddhas, they represent nothing else but our enlightened nature. And they are then associated with the experience we have in afterlife, in the state of bardo. They appear. If one has received transmission for them, the visions can be recognized as these 100 peaceful and restful deities, and by recognizing it's the possibility for liberation. Okay. Here you see the practitioner visualizing the 5 Dhyani Buddhas, and these are then some restful Buddhas with animal heads appearing. Again, here we have Vajrasattva and Samanthabhadra, showing that, again, we have this narrative. This is another scene. Here you have, some of you know, for example, that image because we have that on a book Elio did. And here you have various practitioners, and they are doing practices connected to the Tögal teaching. They look in the open space and they have visions. For example, these lines, rekas, half stupa, or here looking like a feather, or this net these Buddha eyes here. So these are kind of visions which can spontaneously manifest when one looks into the open space and is resting in the natural state. Here I could not locate the text, and I asked two lineage holders of these teachings. Also, they didn't know the literary sources for it. Left and right, we could identify the text, but for this part of the wall, there was no text available. And here on the top is this famous image you all know, which is often used for in advertising or in communicating that there's some yantra yoga teachings happening, which is here some Trulkor, some yoga which has, like here, it's a particular text called the key to the secret knowledge on the channels and winds, and it's 23 different exercises. Here on the right side, you have the guardians of these teachings. You see always kind of a palace. I'll show you a detail later. There's 3 palaces, and then there's 3 guardians coming from the palace, and here 3 times they are then sitting or kneeling at the feet of Padmasambhava when they were kind of subjugated by Padmasambhava and got the job to guard these teachings. Here you see Peha, and he took off his hat, and Padmasambhava is holding the Vajra on his head as a sign of subjugation. And he's folding his hands and offering, I don't know if that is a kata. And here you see also King Trisong Detsen. And this is the Naga king, Niletöka, which looks like Vaishravana, the god of riches, holding here this mongoose animal, spitting jewels. And here on the left, he's then kneeling before Padmasambhava, his helmet on the ground, his horse waits behind him, and here a particular beautiful image of Padmasambhava. This one we looked at. Here that's a text connected to showing the connection between our primal state or Rigpa and the association with the elements in connection to the creation of the body, but also to the seasons, how everything is kind of connected. And here you kind of have a nice text. Here you have the cosmic bhaga or vagina, and the text to it reads, here you have the text, prior the existence of the elements, even the name of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas didn't exist. From space arose wind. Now we get the explanation from the Dzogchen point of view how existence manifested. So from space, from emptiness, arose wind, from wind water, and from water earth, which became a support for sentient beings. Then now you have the connection to the development of the embryo. Wind arose within the womb, from the manifest moisture, and from that flesh, the abiding place of the mind. Thus finish the chapter on this matter. And you will later see that this is kind of explained in more detail. Here below you again have this image of the Mount Meru with the various, here you have on the top kind of, in the center you have the palace of the gods on Mount Meru, and then above you have kind of, normally they speak about the 33 realms in the dimension or in the realms of form of the gods, and then you have 4 levels of the formless realms. And down here, then down is then the desire realms, where also our world of Jambudvipa is in the south. Here we don't see that. Here also you see kind of depictions of the 5 elements. You have fire, you have water, you have that could be wind, and you have earth. So this is a common topic here, how the elements correspond with creation of beings based on our potential of enlightenment. So here you have 2 modes of coming into the world. Here you see once kind of, it says, by the wind of karma, the consciousness or the prana mind, Semlung, is uniting with the parents in the moment of sexual union. So the male and the female essence come together with the consciousness of a being. This is driven by the wind of karma. And here it says there's also the possibility, which is whereby on its own a being decides and chooses its parents, not driven by the karma, but by free will. And so here you have kind of depiction of an enlightened being sending light down to the parents. And so they receive what we traditionally call a tulku, a nirmanakaya incarnation. So one is kind of the powerless or without control, and the other is in control. And here, this text doesn't have any, or these images don't have any description. So there's no text written on it. So I was wondering which text it represents, because also if you see the symbolism, you don't have no idea what it's all about. But then I asked Gangteng Rinpoche from Bhutan, who is one of the lineage holders of the teaching of Pema Lingpa, and he pointed me to a text. And finally I could identify the text by here, these scenes we have, there's all these kind of men standing there with beards, and one is wondering, what is this? You see you see channels, but you see organs, but when you get the text, you understand, oh, these are embryo, and these are the different weeks of the development of the embryo. So up here you have kind of let's see here. Here you have conception. Then that is the first week, second week, third week, fourth week, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. Yeah? Here you have a mother with a baby in the stomach, and in the text it says, then you have the morning sickness. If you're a pregnant woman, can have the morning sickness. And finally, I could identify this text when I looked at this image, because here you see various organs, like kidneys, or you see the heart, and you see then the connection to the senses. And in the text it says, for example, the essence of the spleen develops from the lips. Yeah? Here you have the lips. Then on the base of the nadis, the channels of the body, forms, then arms, legs, and form. The left and right kidney nadis develop. They ascend and form the ears. I mean, this is kind of how in Tibetan medicine the development of the embryo is explained, and that's then always in connection here to the 5 elements. And when I had this text in Tibetan, I could say, oh, that's exactly in how it's depicted here. So by that I knew certainly that it was the text. And here on this Lukhang paintings, this is not very elaborated. I mean, the guy who made the paintings, he was not aware that there's already kind of much more refined images of this development. Here you see the same process. There is kind of the conception of mother and father, and then you have the development of the embryo. And I mean, Tibetans did know that. They didn't have a magnifying glass. You know, they just could get that in vision. That this is kind of very fascinating where they got this knowledge, that they see that the cell is separating, you know, from one getting into various parts, and how then the cell separates into more and more, and how the embryo is then forming. And then they say at that stage the embryo is on the level of fishes. Later it's on the level of reptiles, and finally it's on the level of mammal. And that's really interesting. I mean, it's not that the Tibetans had this knowledge, but it's already an Indian knowledge. And they have that then speaking about, I think, the 10 incarnations of, is it Vishnu? And he goes also through these different phases of the animals, you know. So it's like our evolutionary development coming from very simple animals through fish, reptiles, mammal to humans. And this is represented in their knowledge how the embryo forms, to which stages the embryo goes. And I think that's very fascinating that they had this kind of knowledge in Tibet or India before they had any microscopes. So these are then the famous scene of the Yantra Yoga, or the Trulkor, which is kind of the Tibetan equivalent for Yantra Yoga. And here again you see the dialogue of Samantabhadra and Vajrasattva. And here you see kind of how it's then represented in the book with my commentaries. Yeah? And since these images have no text, you know, it's kind of a guessing. I can describe what one sees there and, you know, what it implies, but it's here we don't have inscriptions, and without inscriptions it's quite speculative. I mean, some things are evident, but other things are speculative. And we hope one day we find the text, maybe in the library of the Potala, where all these murals are described, because, you know, somebody had a concept how to do these decorations, these murals. And normally such a thing is laid down in a text, because you just don't go there and start painting and writing, but you first have the idea and you write the text, write it down. And there's good chances that it's still available in the library of the Potala, but unfortunately we don't have access to it. But one day, you know, I hope that with more openness there's access to it. So this is another wall. You see here the damage, which is done, you know, by water coming in through the roof. And this is very interesting because this wall shows really the whole path of Dzogchen, starting here on the top, and then, you know, going down here, and like that up, and you have kind of the whole path of Dzogchen Upadesha with the preparational practices, then finally going into Tögal. And this is a picture I took, you see, you know, as a layperson or not as a photographer. I took that in the Nobulinka Palace, where there are copies of the Lukhang paintings. It was the first time I used the digital camera. It was a place I was not allowed to take pictures, so, you know, was stress, no light. And then it came out like this, but at least This is a copy of what you saw before, and this top part here is what was damaged. So at least there's a copy with all the text in another place, but it's very difficult to get access to it. It's not part of, you cannot visit it. But I hope one day that I can get good images of that, and then for the missing parts, we have the copies which I showed in a research on it was done in 1930, the copy. And funny, the interesting thing is in the room where this image is, the young Dalai Lama stayed for a long time. So the Dalai Lama was always very interested in the Lukhang, because he said, as a kid, I slept in this little temple in Nobulinka, and the walls were painted with these yogis, like, from the Lukhang. And I always was looking at the wall and, reading and falling asleep with these images. But they are not of the same quality as in the Lukhang, because, the artists were not as gifted. So that is an image of this little temple where you find these copies of the Lukhang paintings. And here, again, I show which texts relate to which part of the wall. So here there are 4 different texts. And here you can, by following the text, you can then say, here's number 1, that comes first in the text. Then this image is related, then comes later in the text. And by kind of putting the lines, the inscriptions of the wall next to the Tibetan book of Pema Lingpa, then you can see the order of the images. Here you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's not numbered in the image, but by the text you can really understand the images. And here on top, the first scene is, it says, the student is going to the master and asking for teaching. So somebody is kneeling in top of the teacher and asking for teaching. And that is a copy somebody did on the Lukhang images. Mike Farmer gave me these images. He was involved in the project where Nepali, Tibetan, copied all the Lukhang images. So that was kind of then the way they came out. But you see, it's different. I mean, they have the inscriptions and everything, but the style is quite different. And here, for example, you see Vajrasattva. And here you see 2 yogis standing, and that is like our practice of the 6 lokas. Here it says the syllables Asunitri Predu for the 6 lokas, and it says you do the purification of the 6 lokas. And that is part of the teaching. And here you see a person doing the Vajra position. And here kind of the practice with the hung. You have many hungs in the body going back and forth. And here is also, that you see that on the next image. Here this yogi is visualizing that the hung is kind of spiraling up the tree to the top. And this yogi is sending hungs to whatever comes to his mind. It's called the traveling exercise, and you dissolve everything by the power of the sound of hung into emptiness. And when you did all these exercises and you have some experience, finally it says you go to the teacher and he gives you direct introduction. So here somebody sitting in front of the master, he uses the damaru drum and the bell, and he then points out to the student how he can recognize the natural state, how he can discover it in its own being. And then afterwards you apply, for example, various positions, like here we have the crouching elephant, or like the lion, or like the rishi, the sage positions, which are then used in the practices. And after they kind of reached some stability of remaining in the natural state, which means you are in a state of presence, but you are not distracted by any thoughts or emotion. They still come, but they don't distract you. And then you continue to, or you recognize that any thought and emotion, perception are nothing else but your own energy manifesting, that it is, you then continue to the practice which is called Tögal, or the Great Leap, or difficult to translate, where you then work with vision. But you don't visualize anything, but you let visions happen by its own. So again, as I said before, you have these visions which looks here like these lines, reka, or like a net, or you have these ticklers, these light spheres, and they are described, or you have this, what is called the Vajra chain, various ticklers, one after the other. And so this is described how you can induce these visions. For example, you know, if you look here on the setting sun, or not directly on the sun, it could harm your eyes. And here these are practitioners who do this practice, and then the visions can become more and more complex, that, you know, then the ticklers contain here, for example, this mandala bija, or this tickle mandala. You have kind of the 5 elements of a mandala here, and then in the mandala they appears the 5 Buddha families, or whatever, you know, in the mandala, in these ticklers, things appear which nobody has seen before. It's just spontaneously happening. And by having these kind of visions, one understands the process of how actually reality appears to us. Like, you can have these visions also in the dark, where there is nothing to see, and still these visions can appear. You are aware, you are awake, and you suddenly can find yourself in a complete reality which looks like every day, but you understand, oh, it's your own energy manifesting. And by that you understand that in everyday life also whatever manifests is nothing as your own energy manifesting. I mean, in Buddhism, we don't say that these things don't exist. There is something, but the way it exists for us depends on our kind of habits, on our karmic imprints. Here you have kind of, again, from this artist from Kathmandu, how he represents these visions with more complex mandalas and particular experience. For example, here it says somebody is looking at his hand, and it says at that stage of the practice you can look through your hand. Yeah? Here you see this again. Here I think here we have the scene of the 3 different kinds of realization. We see that later in more detail, but again here you see the mandala appearing of the 5 Buddhas, another mandala, and each line, you know, each image is with a description. This is a scene from the state in between the bardo, what a deceased person can experience, and this text, this part of the wall is dedicated to the state of bardo. I mean, I'm running out of time, so less comments. Yeah, here, this is a text where there are various ways of getting experiential knowledge. For example, here we see the teacher and the student, and here 3 people, they're wearing masks, and it says by appearing like that, they kind of introduce the student that in an afterlife state, they can be these manifestations of shocking deities which make noise, and so they show a dance, and by that the teacher tells the student, hey, you know, that can happen when you are in a state in between death and next life in the bardo. Or here the teacher is pressing the arteries of a student, and if you press the arteries, you can have a state of no thought. Yeah? Don't do that, but it's one way of introducing to a particular state of mind. Here, up, come back. No. Okay. Well, it seems like we should stop soon. Actually, I don't know why it does that. Oh, that's me. Let's try again. Soon we are done. This is kind of we come to the final scene. Give it a little time, maybe. Okay, I don't make it bigger right now, otherwise it is gone again. So here, here you see 3 ways of dying. So one person, which says has less capacity, less developed abilities, when this person dies, he's reborn in a Nirmanakaya realm, in a pure land where, you know, there are good circumstances for practicing Dharma to reach enlightenment. This is symbolized by a Buddha head. Here it says the medium capacity, for people with medium capacity, they are reborn in a Sambhogakaya dimension, shown by a person flying. Don't do that. And the final one is the phenomena which is called rainbow body, which means that the physical body returns to its energetic or light nature. The elements are by nature formed out of light. And this light, where are you? The body returns to its light nature. That phenomena they call in Tibet rainbow body, which is still happening up to today. It's rare, but still there are some yogis, yoginis, they die without leaving a corpse. The corpse is not there anymore when these people die. In a process which takes, normally one says, a week, the body shrinks and shrinks, and in the end there's just the cloth, the belt, the hair, and the nails, but the physical body is gone. The physical body is returned into its light nature. And so this is symbolized here with this rainbow over this yogi. It says supreme yogi attains the rainbow body. Okay, so now 2 hours are over, so I stop here. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. Otherwise, we can say good night. Are there any questions? I cannot see online if there is with Zoom anything, but no. Okay, yeah. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience, and have a nice evening. Yes?
I was curious why.
There's a question, so microphone is going there.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It was really very nice. I was curious with the murals in the Lukhang that were, as far as I understood, written or painted for the 6th Dalai Lama, the 5th or the 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why? If it's his private room, presumably he would have been pretty familiar with these teachings already. Were they kind of like notes for him to remember without referencing texts? Was it just aesthetics? Like maybe he really liked this particular text? Like why did he have it done?
Well, that's an interesting question, why they are there. I don't know even, I mean, there is in the biography of the 6th Dalai Lama, there is kind of a chapter when he kind of decorated the temple. Yeah? But I couldn't find anything in his biography that actually he did something like work on the Lukhang. Yeah? So one idea is there was this famous minister, Sanjay Gyatso, who was kind of the right hand of the 5th Dalai Lama. And when the 5th Dalai Lama died, for I think 12 years, he covered his death until he presented the 6th Dalai Lama. And there's one idea that Sanjay Gyatso, that he kind of did the composition of the Lukhang. And you know, since also the 6th Dalai Lama being in the family lineage of the Pema Lingpa, maybe he has chosen that topic. But that's kind of an idea. And how much the Dalai Lama actually was practicing this teaching, I don't know. There's written that the 5th Dalai Lama received this teaching of Pema Lingpa. But also Pema Lingpa was, very great, exceptional master. He's one of the 5 Tibetan kings. He was the incarnation of Longchenpa. So his teaching was quite widely spread. Also like the 3rd Karmapa received transmission from the teachings of Pema Lingpa. But why they were there, and if the 6th Dalai Lama was practicing that, I don't know. And we don't know if there were other places which had similar paintings, if that was a unique thing, having these detailed images, or if there were other places. I heard somebody said, yeah, in Mindroling there's similar pictures, images, but I don't know. So far haven't seen anything like that. So many questions.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Nothing online? Okay. Thank you for your patience, and so let's finish here. Bye-bye. See you somewhere.